What I'm looking at. Okay, gotcha. Wow, we are live. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Rodney Omeokachie, and you are welcome to this very special Africa Podcast Day broadcast. My name is, once again, Rodney Omeokachie. I am a brand developer, an entrepreneur, an audio storyteller, and a podcaster. I'm the host of a podcast called The Young God. It is fantastic, it is dope, dare I say. And I highly recommend you go check that out so you can verify a lot of what I'm about to say in this masterclass. This masterclass that is titled Podcast Intelligence. For those of you that are new here, podcast intelligence is it's a term I coined a couple of maybe 2 years ago to describe that intentional thought process of creating an audio experience for the listener. So this takes into account your strengths, your weaknesses, your skills, the context of the environment you live in, the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, the audience, their demographics, psychographics, all these things influencing the final audio podcast product you put out week in and week out. It's just being cerebral about how you place things, how you say things, and being cognizant of the effect that your words are going to have on your audience. So, podcast intelligence encompasses a lot of different things. It happens in the edit. Okay, we're still on. So, for the sake of this masterclass, I'll be focusing on storytelling. Everybody is a storyteller these days. Storytelling has become the industry buzzword that we sprinkle on our proposals and bios to make ourselves seem more interesting and cool and credible. But make no mistake, there are levels to this. And in this masterclass, I will show you the levels. First of all, I want you to be aware of your superpower as a storyteller, as an African storyteller, right? There are stories only you have the power to tell because there is no one who looks at the world in the way that you do. There is no one who fights the way that you do. You're the one. Are you with me? You know what I mean? You are the one. You're one of one. And so there's a huge responsibility and power in that I think a podcast intelligent person must be aware of at all times. And you must take that seriously. You must use that as the engine, as the steam that powers your storytelling dreams, right? And there's a reason we always say that the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. And that's because the world is built on the supremacy of speech. John chapter 1 says, I'm huge on faith, so I'm going to use that to make my point in this instance. In the Bible, John chapter 1 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Later on, we are told that Jesus Christ is the Word made flesh, a living, breathing embodiment of the Word. And that's just a tip of the iceberg to show how important storytelling has been forever. Even God himself is attached to the idea of storytelling, right? So it's one of those things where the more articulate you are, the more you matter, the more powerful you are, the more you're able to use words, the more you can really create and speak things into existence. Because articulation is the ability to exercise the consciousness to change your reality and the reality of others. So as a storyteller, You're sitting on this gold mine of being able to change minds, change the world, change a community, a culture. Like, words are powerful in that way. And so, as an audio storyteller, your job is to be able to use this skill, but via audio. So it's using voice, sounds, timing, and everything at your disposal to tell the best possible story. So my question to you, dear listener and audience, wherever you are in the world, my question is, are you a storyteller if you haven't mastered your own story? If you haven't found the thread that connects everything you've ever done, everything you've been through, and the person you've become? Your power as a storyteller is dependent on how well you know your own story. As I said earlier, there are stories only you have the power to tell because no one looks at the world the way you do, right? You have to believe in the validity of your own story. You have to believe that what you have to say and what you're seeing and what you're experiencing is worth bringing to the forefront. It's worth listening to. It's worth paying attention to. You have to be confident in what you say and your point of view, even at the risk of being misunderstood. And I think everyone has something to author, because how could you live and have no story to tell, right? So this is the mindset I want you to consider if you call yourself a storyteller. It's not just being able to tell a story, but you also have to see yourself as a story being told, a story being lived, because the story is only as good or as powerful as the storyteller. In sociology, let's go into let's go into sociology for a second. So I've gone scripture, now we're going to sociology. In sociology, there is a concept called habitus, which is the link between our habitat, our habits, and our character. So essentially, your habitus is the reality in your head based on the things you've witnessed. And in the case of a storyteller like myself and yourself, that's what brings us business. If you can lean into your unique point of view, that's if you have one, of course, you can create opportunities that bring you bread, that bring you money, that bring you business. Back to scripture. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus said, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. So what this means is that your experiences, your gifts, your point of view, your truth can bring you power if you know how to use them, if you bring them forth in a meaningful and constructive manner. I'll take it a step further. Let's go into psychology now. Telling your own story is the secret to your survival. So what that means is, when you know and tell your own story, you develop the tools to identify and tell other stories as well. So if you're a content creator, marketer, brand developer, writer, author, musician, you name it. Sorry, excuse me. The best storytellers know their own story well, and they draw from it to tell stories that touch. Are you with me? I hope so. So when you're that good a storyteller, you have all kinds of opportunities to make money and achieve fame and recognition. That's survival. That's you using the only thing you truly own, your experiences, your story, to thrive. Now let's go into entrepreneurship. I'm hitting all the cylinders today. Just flow with me, okay? Entrepreneurship. What is the first rule of entrepreneurship? Find a problem to solve. When you know your story, you can identify problems only you can solve. See where I'm going with this? That's how life-changing products and billion-dollar businesses are built. It's the story that compels investors to invest. It's the story that moves customers to spend their hard-earned money. People don't want more information. They're up to their eyeballs in information. What they really want is faith. Faith in you, your goals, your success, in the story you tell. But faith needs a story to sustain it. A meaningful story that inspires belief in you and renews hope that your ideas do indeed offer what they promise. Wow. Shall I come again? What people really want, what your customers and your audience really want, more than information and data and AI and tech and all those really nice, fancy 21st century things, what they really want is faith. Faith in you, your goals, your success, in the story you tell. But faith needs a story to sustain it. A meaningful story that inspires belief in you and renews hope that your ideas do indeed offer what they promise. Right. So at this point, I'm going to pause and tell you my story, how I got here, how I earned the opportunity, the honor, and the privilege to be hosting a masterclass by on Africa Podcast Day with AfriPods. So in 2019, I started my podcast, The Young God. And what I really wanted to do with it was to tell the best stories in my image and to create not just tell the best stories, but the best audio stories, to really use everything at my disposal to create an experience that would entertain, engage, and enlighten my audience. I wanted to make a situation whereby when you tapped play, if you showed up, if you found my podcast at any point in time and you press play, you will be rewarded. You will be amazed, in awe of what you heard. And for me, it started way before I pressed record. I picked up a mic to start recording. This intentionality began with how I titled the podcast, my cover art, my description, my voice, all these things that we tend to not really factor in to the story we're telling. But storytelling is everything from what people see. Like your cover art, for example, is a visual promise, is a visual story that, you know, if you tap play on this podcast, you will hear something that aligns with what you've just seen. And so a lot of podcasters sort of like shirk or don't think too much about that. Or maybe they think about it a lot, but not in the context of how does what you're seeing on this cover art reflect on what you're about to hear? How does the title, what story does your title tell? Even if it's just 3 words or whatever that title is, how does that influence or add to the story you're telling or about to tell? And so it was very important to me that if I named my podcast The Young God, it clicks. There's a story here. And so it triggers the curiosity of whoever comes across the title. A podcast called The Young God. What is that about? What does God have to do with this? Why is God young? You know, then you would see the cover art and you would see this artwork, which was designed by yours truly. You would see this thing that was just unlike the usual podcast artworks you see out there. If you go on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any podcast platform, there's a sort of framework or template as to how podcasts are, you know, promoted visually. And so you see that there's a like even you know it's a podcast when you see a cover of a podcast. But I wanted to break that, you know, that mold and create an artwork that was in my image, that it could be the artwork for an album, it could be the artwork for a book. You just don't know. All I know is that it looks amazing, it looks interesting, and it looks distinct. And that was part of my storytelling. And then when you eventually pressed play or tapped play, the way I entered the topic, the way I began the episode, the very first sounds you heard, my story was being lived in real time every time, right? So I did that for years, and I began to gain some traction. Um, I began to attract award nominations. I began to attract infamy, notoriety, because my takes, my thoughts, my point of view, the way I tell my stories, the places I decide to go on my podcast are um, intentionally and really one of one. There's really nothing like it. So when I put that out there, um, I earned some recognition. I earned an audience from 0 listeners to 10 listeners to 100 listeners, from 0 episodes to 100 episodes to 200 episodes, and that journey, week in week out, is that conversation, that story between myself and my audience, and I'm living up to it every single episode, every single word, every single decision is with that story in mind. What is the young God? Who is the young God? What does it mean to be a God? Why is it important to be a God? How does each episode and each theme and topic align with the idea of being a God unto oneself, being the best version of yourself? And how is my life a part of that? Am I the best version of myself? Do I act like that? Do I live it? Do I have stories? Do I have proof? Do I have evidence? And so that has just been the thing that has kept me in the game as a podcaster, as a storyteller, as an audio storyteller, as an African audio storyteller. And let me just say, as an aside, being an African storyteller maybe means something different to me than it means to most other African storytellers. Because when you listen to my podcast, it doesn't sound African. And I didn't, what does that even mean? I don't create with the desire to sound like an African storyteller. By virtue of being an African, born to African parents, living in Africa, I am African. And so, by virtue of that, whatever comes out of my mouth, whatever I decide to put forth is African. It's an African story. Whether it's told, whether it's about Kenya, or it's about Nigeria, or it's about Europe, whatever. In fact, I explore Greek mythology a lot. I really am a fan of that. And in my telling of Greek mythology to my audience, it is an African story, regardless of the theme or the location or the culture that I'm exploring. And I think, and I say this to say, we shouldn't put ourselves in a box to be one thing. In fact, on my podcast, you hardly ever hear African music or African sounds or things like that, because that's not my experience. That's not what my taste is drawn to, and I don't yet see the value of that in the story I'm telling currently. But make no mistake, it is an African podcast, an African story, regardless, right? And so I want us to really think beyond the color of our skin and the label of being African, and just create freely. Whatever you create, as long as you're African, it is African. Same with those in diaspora. We can't say that podcasters or storytellers in the diaspora aren't telling African stories, even if they're telling stories based on their experience, which may not be about Africa or in Africa, but by virtue of their origin, it is African. And I say this to say that the story is most important, not it being an African story. Tell the best story you can. That should be the goal. Don't think of, I want to be an African storyteller, or I want to identify or put forth stories as an African storyteller. Just tell the story that you're moved to tell, you're inspired to tell, that only you can tell. And as far as you're African, it's an African story. Here's another question. What if your journey and your philosophy became your monopoly? Again, only you have experienced what you've experienced. There's only one version of you that's ever been alive in all of history. Those are the seeds for some epic stories, for some epic point of views. And the onus is on you to figure that out, to take advantage of that, to develop that uniqueness to the nth degree so that your stories can touch. Because fam, as a podcaster, as a storyteller, you have the potential to change your listeners' behavior with just your words. And so what I'm hoping I'm achieving with this masterclass, this, talk, is to help you turn that potential into ability, to help you understand how to capture a listener's attention, build tension, and then come to a satisfying conclusion. That's why we're here. We're 22 minutes in. Once again, if you're just joining me, my name is Rodney Omeokachie. I'm the host of a podcast called The Young God, and we're here celebrating Africa Podcast Day, courtesy of AfriPods, APVA. Thank you for joining us or joining me. And where was I? The power of storytelling, right? Again, it has been exhausted throughout. Every year, every day, every month, there's some other webinar, lecture, workshop that is discussing the power of storytelling. I'm just here to offer my distinct point of view on it from my experience having told stories for more than a decade. I've been telling stories as a photographer, as a brand developer, as a filmmaker, as a music video producer, and most recently, since 2018, as a podcaster. So I like to think I have skin in the game, I have a point of view that is worth listening to, that is worth something. And I can tell you that, fam, storytelling separates meaningful, engaging, and dynamic content from every other type of content in the world. Storytelling is about connection. Stories connect people to each other, and they connect people to ideas. Storytelling is the ultimate lightning rod for human attention, and human attention is the ultimate currency. Not time, not money, not human attention is the game at the end of the day. High quality attention. So beyond likes, comments, shares, whatever, actual attention, like people dedicating their time and brain power to listen or watch and engage with your work. That is what this is about. Everything else, data, logic, and tech feeds into this. So if you can wrap the information in a compelling narrative, it will move the needle. Decisions are made in response to a story, whether it's a pitch, a product, or a brand's vision. So I'm here to tell you that if you want to accomplish anything meaningful, the story is the interface between it and the world. Get that wrong and nobody will give a fuck. Excuse my French. Get that wrong and nobody will care. Get it right and you will find the lever that moves the world. Storytelling is a powerful tool that can be used in three ways, okay? Personal and community development, brand building and marketing, entertainment. Personal and community development, brand building and marketing, entertainment. Now, podcasts are the only media that has the potential to tick all three boxes. The advantage independent podcasters have over journalists and other media outlets is that you have access to stories, conversations, and information that they don't. You can tell stories that people want to hear, but they don't know exist. That's your superpower. So if you're a podcaster, if you're an audio storyteller, think about, in fact, if you're a storyteller in any field, these things I'm saying apply across the board, but there will be some specifics to audio storytelling. At this moment, whatever storyteller you are, think about what stories haven't been told, what stories haven't been told in a way that you can tell it. So it's like tell a popular story in a fresh way. You know what? Let me recap because I felt like I lost my train of thought there. Think about what stories haven't been told. Think about what stories haven't been told in a way that you can tell it. That is, if you're going to tell a popular story, tell it in a fresh way. What conversations haven't been had? What fresh perspectives can you bring to an old conversation? What experiences have you had that can make a great story? And finally, and most importantly, what fascinates you? Right? What are you curious about? And if you notice, I haven't said anything about think about what people want to hear. Oh no, that's a low fruit. That's a low hanging fruit as a storyteller. Your power is to lean into what you want to see in the world, what stories you want to hear, what you want to be told, and then making the move to tell it. Okay? So now the $1,000,000 question is, after considering all these things, right? How do you find all these and bring that to your audience in the most convenient and entertaining way possible? So before you get to the actual recording of podcast episodes, the story starts, like I said, with the name you give your podcast, its cover art, and its description. Even the trailer. All these things matter before you start to put out actual episodes. The story has to be coherent throughout because that's how you sow the seeds that will keep listeners coming back and sharing your podcast. Okay? Now we're about to get mathematical. We're about to get into the nitty-gritty of storytelling. What you just listened to, the last 30 minutes has just been me sort of like setting up the bit for why you should care about what I'm about to say next. All right, so if you want to tell stories that touch, here's the formula. Especially if you're a monologue, if you're a one-host podcaster like myself, I'm a one-man wrecking ball. I'm a one-man army. I do monologues. I pick a topic and I just like go into it on my own. And you can imagine how tricky that can be when you don't have a host or a guest to lean on. When you just have to go to a place over 30 to 40 minutes on your own. That's what I do best, and I've mastered that. So I can tell you that if you're one of those, and if you want to master that properly, there's a simple formula and there's a complex formula. The simple formula is tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, then tell them what you've told them. So that's like the 3-act structure. The intro is tell them what you're going to tell them. In the body, tell them. And then in the conclusion, tell them what you've told them, like a recap. But every master audio storyteller knows this, that the devil is in the details. So before you say or write one word, find your hook, your angle. How can you tell this thing like no one else has or can? That's the hard part. That is where superpower starts to like really get tested. That's where your curiosity is tested. And number two, um, how do I put this? Okay, so with most stories, we already know the ending. The airliner crashed, the plane crashed, the girl was saved, right? But what's interesting is how that happened, how we got there. If your house catches fire, for example, the most interesting thing is what you took out. So really lean into fleshing out the details and extracting as many points of interest as possible. That's the second part of these details that you need to like really understand. So as you're telling them what you're about to tell them, as you're telling them and as you're telling them what you've told them, you gotta like know your hook, know your angle, and you have to like flesh out those details with precision and um, effort to really engage your audience. And once you have your hook, and once you have your items of interest, you must now figure out how to organize your script so that you can take the listener on a journey using the 3-act structure. Act one, set up the hook. So what I do is I try as much as possible to hook my listeners with a strong opening. Sometimes I can be dramatic, I can be unique, I can be surprising. My point is I want to make them think. So it's like, okay, I need to hear the rest of this. That's what that hook does to the listener. Your goal is to make them think. I need to, your goal is to make them think, I need to hear the rest of this. I need to hear more. And so you got to keep in mind that the way in which a story begins is a starting event that creates a moment of change. How the story begins, how you set up that hook. You know, for instance, so in my experience as a brand developer, right? I've been in projects where we have to maybe create a website, and you have to sell this website to the customer or the client so they can buy in and bring out the money necessary for that. Now, if I was going to talk about this on a podcast, for example, if I was going to use a podcast to sell this idea to potential clients out there and say, hey, um, um, come and get your podcast created by my company or whatever. Um, my first thought is, how can I turn a potentially dry episode about website conversion optimization into a riveting story? So instead of diving straight into a list of optimization strategies, I would create more drama by setting the scene up with the problem. So I would explain first and foremost why a poor conversion rate drags businesses down. Then I will introduce the listener to a situation where they are affected by poor conversions. Do you go where I'm going with this? So I would set up the problem of a website that doesn't convert properly. And then I'll go even further by making the listener empathize with the story by putting them in there and saying how this would affect you, your business, if your website wasn't converting properly. And this setup sets the stakes and makes the listener care. It makes the target audience care. So you can now apply that to any number of things that you're trying to, discuss. The story. How can you turn that thing into a story? How can you turn that thing into a narrative that is compelling enough that not only engages but educates the listener? Now, Act 2. Building tension. The plot twists and the problems you're sharing should seem real. They can't seem contrived or unrelatable. For instance, people make mistakes, right? So it's good to highlight your character's errors, bad habits, near failures, and failures in in order for the story to be relatable. Characters who conquer. I'm sorry, I need some water. Hold on. Man, I've been chatting for like almost 35 minutes without sipping water. Expert tip: always have water nearby if you're doing voice work, recording, scripting, whatever. Because man, the throat gets dry really fast, and you don't want your cadence to be affected. But anyway, that's by the way. I'm talking about Act Two: build tension. And to build tension, you must be authentic in your approach, in the story you're telling. The plot twists and problems you're sharing must seem real, right? So if you're telling a story about a character, highlight the character's weaknesses, failures, bad habits. You know, don't just make them, don't just focus on their wins. Don't just focus on their overcoming, right? Because characters who conquer adversity without a sweat aren't interesting, right? But with a good story, you can make that character feel relatable and authentic. So this means that when you tell stories about how you or other people overcame problems, don't be afraid to weave in the failures, whether external or internal. If your lesson was expensive, explain the real cost. Like again, the details are where the magic are. Like really find the details of how much things sucked before they got better. If you or your guest had to grow as a person, create a contrast between old and new versions of yourselves. If you bring a guest onto your show, push them to elaborate on their missteps, on their mishaps. Ask them what caused those circumstances and why they struggled. Like, really, really get into the nitty gritty of how they got to B from A. Like, the journey in between is so important, and the better you are at bringing that to the forefront, man, the better the story. Because stories with ups and downs are captivating because they're more like real life. We all understand how things never work out immediately. You know, there must be a period of trying and it not working and trying and trying. And I say this to say not just if you're telling a personal story, but any story about anything, the details, build tension with the details. Really find out more and more nuggets and gems and information that can flesh out what happened between point A and B. And if you can do that, Act 3 will make so much sense. The emotional payoff will be just, and which brings me to Act 3, which is resolve tension. The purpose of Act 3 is to give listeners an emotional payoff. So you've listened through Act 1 and Act 2. So naturally, you want a satisfying end to reward them for following the story. And if you fail to resolve the story properly, at best, they will consider your podcast unmemorable. At worst, they will feel cheated. Either way, you've lost an audience that could have been valuable. So you have to really like think strategically about how you're going to build a story in a way that now resolves the tension in the most epic way possible. So what I like to do is in my third act, in my final act, I will maybe reveal that final piece of information that solves the problem or bestows the lesson. I would explain the main thing that I want my listeners to walk away with. So, you know, or I could just finish with a twist. I don't know. Like, it's really up to you, and the story will decide what it is the appropriate tension. But you have to just have that in mind as you're telling a story, as you're building the script, as you're building the episode, right? This means you should plan every episode with the end in mind. You should always know where you're going, right? And even if you don't know where you're going, just know that wherever it ends up has to like resolve the tension of the previous parts. Most importantly, do not reveal the climax early in the episode. Otherwise, you will never build tension. A lot of amateur podcasters and storytellers, they get excited and they just like drop the best part in the beginning or middle of the episode, and that doesn't bode well for the experience of the listener. Sure, you've saved them time from not having to like listen to the entire thing, but that emotional connection to you as a host and to your podcast as a brand, as their go-to for entertainment or education is gone, right? So you have to like really, 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 really be careful not to like reveal the best stuff too soon. All of this to say that a good idea, topic, story, right, is the beginning point of every good episode of a podcast. And really, it's up to your taste to determine what is good and what is not, which is the other superpower here, your sense of taste as a storyteller. You have to be able to like have a sense of what is really, really good and not just what is a story. Like, what is the good story, what is the great story, and what is the awesome story. So your sense of taste, your taste in stories will determine what you choose or what you go with, right? So now, for me, what happens is a good story sets up good research, and good research sets up good writing or good storytelling, and good writing sets you up for a good script. A good script sets you up for a good recording session slash vocal performance, and a good recording slash vocal performance sets you up for great editing and arrangement. And a good edit creates a great listener experience and even better content marketing. So you can see it's a snowball effect, this thing. Everything, podcast intelligence, fam. Everything adds up. Everything is connected. So at every stage, if you do your due diligence, you will set up a better experience for yourself, the creator, as you go along, the journey to create the episode, which will ultimately end in the listener having an experience that is memorable, that will encourage them to share, subscribe, engage, and most importantly, think. You will change them. You will change their lives if your stuff is that good. Personally, I like to think of each episode of my podcast as a sandwich. There's the opening and the closing, which are the two sides of the bread, right? At the top, at the bottom. And in between those two is the meat, the cheese, lettuce, tomato, and the sauce. The sauce, the secret ingredient, which is really just your individual personality and skill as a speaker, as a raconteur, as a conversationalist, as a storyteller. Now, each layer is arranged with meticulous attention and precision. I leave nothing to chance. That is the body of the episode. That's what is in between the bread, right? That lettuce, cheese, meat, whatever, everything in there is very intentionally arranged. And this is where the magic happens, so that when the listener takes a bite of that final episode, fam, the feedback, you think you got good feedback? You think people are caring? Oh my God. you will see like heartfelt responses. You will see how people will use your stuff to like create beauty and magic in their lives. That is the ultimate, like you're no storyteller if your work doesn't have that effect. And that's what we're here for you to have that effect on whoever taps play. Okay? Um Man, I've gone so many places right now. I wish this was a more interactive session. I'd have loved to um, get questions or feedback from you. Unfortunately, it's just me speaking into the void. Hopefully, somebody out there is receiving what I'm saying. Um, but if you have questions or you want to reach out to me for any reason, I'm on Instagram at I am the young god. My DMs are open. I am also on Instagram at the young god pod. DMs are open as well. I respond to everything and I look forward to hearing from you. Um, but yeah, that is where I am at this moment. So if you don't mind, let's take a break and breathe for a moment, okay? I need to catch my breath personally. So wherever you are in the world, in Africa and beyond, if you don't mind, let's take a few short moments to catch our breaths. Close your eyes, take a deep breath in through the mouth, in through the nose, out through the mouth. One more time. In through the nose, out through the mouth. How was that? Now for some coffee. Ooh la la. So I have maybe 30 minutes left to drop gems. So let's see where I can go with this. The next place I want to look at is script writing. Script writing. Believe it or not, I have a script in front of me right now. And I could easily do this in my sleep without a script and just speak to you straightforwardly. But nah, I don't want to shortchange you. I don't want to waste your time. And I want to make this as impactful as possible. This isn't just a way to kill time. This is life-changing stuff that I want to get across to you in the best possible way. So I have a script that loosely lets me know where I need to go and the most important points that I have to put out for you to really get the gist of what I'm saying. And as a monologue podcaster, right, I think it's important to write. But before I say why, let me tell you what I think about writing and why it is maybe the most important, well, second important. So there's speaking, there's thinking, there's speaking, there's writing. And writing is the byproduct of taste, confidence, awareness, and intuition. In terms of the words you choose, the figures of speech that you employ, the way you structure sentences, like it's all a matter of what you've read and your confidence in your point of view. All those things influence what kind of writer you will be and how your writing sounds and feels, right? So I can't teach you to write like me, but I can teach you to write like yourself, to podcast like yourself. Um, an author, Flannery O'Connor, once said, I write to discover what I know. And you should know exactly what you want to say so that you can really intentionally move the audience where you want to go, right? If you speak off the cuff, your ideas will lack depth. You will sound like you're talking to yourself, not really engaging with an audience. You make points, sure, but it will sound unrehearsed. It won't stick in the mind. But when you write, you find yourself going deeper and deeper into the idea. You begin to find out what you really think and really mean. And if you are in tune with your listener of one, that is the one person who at any point in time will be engaging with your podcast, if you're in tune with who that person is, you will begin to imagine the questions that they will have based on what you're communicating, and you will answer them in your writing. And nothing gets a listener to fall in love like a host who seems to be able to read their mind and address their concerns in real time on the podcast, on the episode. The second reason I recommend writing is that it helps your editing. Like I said, a well-written script makes for a fantastic recording performance. So, oh my God, I lost my train of thought. See why we write? I was just going off the cuff just now, and now I'm trying to find out where I was. And now that I have the script in front of me, I can just sort of scroll and say, okay, where did I leave off and where do I want to pick back up? Okay, so another reason why I would recommend you write your script is that each of us at our core, we all like ideas that are well articulated. Anyone can vomit words onto a page, but not everyone can write. And writing, as I said, is the byproduct of taste, confidence, awareness, and intuition. So if you write well, you're basically articulating an idea that could be complex, that could be nuanced, that could be easy to disagree with in a way that carries both those who agree and those who do not agree flawlessly, right? So apart from that, the point of a script is to make the listening experience feel consistent for your listeners from episode to episode. The worst thing you can do as a podcaster is to have different episodes having feeling differently based on your mood. Because if you're not writing, if you don't have a script, you're basically like just shooting off the dome, and you'll be shooting off your mood as well. Like whatever your mood or vibe or energy is at that time is just how you will just sort of like speak. But a script in front of you keeps things consistent from episode to episode, so that those who are listening week in, week out, they can follow along. They can sort of get that you are, serious about the stuff. You're not just, half-assing it on some days and, bringing your A game on other days. There's a consistent feel and vibe, So you have to ask yourself at the end of the day, will your show be fully scripted, ad-libbed, or somewhere in between? Personally, I can reveal to you that some episodes are fully scripted, some are ad-libbed, and some are somewhere in between, depending on how serious the issue is or how difficult the story I want to tell is. So if I'm telling a story about abortions, for example, I need to write that script from A to Z because I do not want to say what I don't mean when it comes to a topic that is very, very polarizing. I want to be able to hit precisely the point I want to make, right? And then if I'm talking about maybe my love life, that is an experience I have personally. That's an experience that I have lived, and no one can argue with me about my experience. Then I can, put the script to the side and just, riff off the cuff and just tell a story as I would tell a friend, or as I would. You get what I'm saying, right? So, now here's the thing. Just because it's a script doesn't mean it should sound scripted. That's where podcast intelligence comes in. If you're writing a script, this is my tip. Write for the ear. Write like you're speaking to that goddamn. Write for the ear. Okay? Write like you're speaking to that listener of one. Write in a conversational tone. Write how you could speak. Write how you talk so that your recording sounds more natural, free flowing, and conversational. You should also be intentional about using a more conversational tone of voice so that you speak to your audience, not at them. Studies have shown that a conversational tone or voice is much more appealing than um, studies have shown, come again, studies have shown that a conversational voice slash tone is much more appealing and effective in creating an emotional connection with your audience, right? So after the script is written out, rehearse several times prior to recording so you can master the cadence and flow and tone that you need to really like have the effect you want to have. And if it's done well, fam, if it is done well, the character and charm of your voice and personality will seal the deal. They will be hooked. They will listen from the first second to the last, and it might even be too short for them, right? And I know this personally. I've seen the benefits of this, so I can tell you that there's nothing quite like a well-written script and a well-recorded, performance. It just makes everything. Then by the time you start to add your sound effects, your music, and ambient sounds and other things to like raise the level of the production, it's a wrap. You have them in the palm of your hands. So there you have it. We're almost at an hour, and I'm almost done. So I will just say to like wrap this up that the art of storytelling is knowing what is worth telling and what isn't, what to put in and what to leave out. So as you're writing that script, go over it enough times because usually there's always going to be fluff. We are notorious for just pouring everything, you know. But if you go over your script at least 7 times, you'll find yourself refining and refining and removing all the excess stuff. Like a sculptor, you're carving out all those, you're carving out the negative material to reveal the perfect masterpiece. And that's the most tedious part, getting your script down to its most refined masterpiece. And again, this is where it's a function of taste and experience and confidence, like knowing and believing in your ability to decide what is worth keeping in and what is worth taking out. And what every audience or listener enjoys is that refinement. I cannot understate or overstate this part. Okay? Ruthlessly eliminate distraction, clutter, and needless complexity. Needless complexity. Okay? Stripping down your scripts to its simplest, most impactful components is an incredibly important mental pathway. The best writing is fluid, light, vivid, and powerful. Being verbose and incoherent kills your impact. So if you do this in your script, you can do this when you're editing. By the time you're editing, you'll even realize more things that maybe don't need to be in there, and you would cut it away. So that by the time your episode is ready to be published, you've refined it to the most impactful, most meaningful, most important, most coherent possible information, and it will bang. And there you have it. Some of my, as an audio storyteller, as a podcaster, brought to you by AfriPods and APVA, brought to you on Africa Podcast Day, a day we celebrate each other as Africans who are moving the African narrative forward from our little corners of the world. Literally, I'm in my bedroom doing this, and from this spot, I've been able to make impact that I could never have dreamed of. And I want that for you. I want that for everyone who is tuning in, to be able to just make meaningful stuff, tell meaningful stories, and build an audience and community that will serve you forever. And that's maybe the last part of this thing. You know, it's being able to build a community that will support you. So if you put in the effort to show up for your audience week in, week out, you will build that audience. They will come, they will stand, they will they will buy whatever you're selling, they will eat whatever you're feeding. And that's just how it goes. So once again, thank you all for the opportunity, APVA, AfriPods. What is going on? Thank you for listening, watching, wherever you are in the world. My name is Rodney Omeokachie. Once again, I'm on Twitter at I am the Young God, and I'm on Instagram at the Young God Pod. Do check out my podcast, The Young God. It's available everywhere. And I guess you can go and verify everything I've said, how it lands, and how I practice it. And it's going to be practiced differently by each of you. Every storyteller has their own like magic sauce. So all of this is just ingredients for you to go and cook up in the way only you can. Thank you and goodbye.